You should be able to talk about whatever you want to talk about and have an exchange of ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Good luck with that. It doesn't work that way. When you put out something that is at odds with the agenda is intolerant when you're dealing with these activists.
Well, that's exactly what Dr. Phil has done. And this time he's not holding back. Dr. Phil, the American author and television personality we all know for letting others have their say, has had enough of this woke madness. But now he's the one doing the talking, and the woke crowd is losing it. Phil's not just concerned, he's calling out the dangers of expressing any opinion that goes against the woke agenda.
See somebody that says something on Twitter or says something in an interview that is offensive to some group, and all of a sudden you start reading the messages they get. It's like, I hope you get ass cancer and die, you son of a bitch. I'll cut your throat. I'll come to your house and kill your children. Are you kidding me?
But the woke agenda doesn't just punish those who disagree. It's controlling and manipulative, and Phil is shocked by how far it has gone. He's especially disturbed by the lengths to which woke culture has gone to cancel even the most harmless words and phrases from the English language. But of all these phrases, one of them confuses Phil the most.
And I'm just curious, some of these maybe are obvious, but if you know why some of these are on the list now.
Mom and dad, I see why that would be up there.
So why would
gendered
mom and
language.
dad be up there?
Why is mom and dad suddenly on the don't say list? From a neutral perspective, one may think that the phrase mom and dad is so ordinary, but wait till you see why woke people have canceled the phrase. This woke couple offers an explanation.
I have a daughter with another woman, and when it's being taught in school that, that's just the norm, that it's just mom and dad, it kind of offends us because we are lesbians, you know what I mean? We come from the community, and it makes us feel like we're not important enough to be called mom and mom or parents.
See how this woke person is saying that using the term mom and dad doesn't sit well with her because she's married to a woman. This is what Phil means when he talks about the woke agenda. He believes it's almost impossible to keep up with because it defies common sense and logic. But beyond that, there's something deeply unsettling about how woke culture demands that you change your behavior just to make others feel better. So it's no wonder he asked this critical question.
So should I stop saying that?
No, not
Because you're mom and mom?
Now, if she stopped there, no one would blame her. But she doesn't. She goes further to hint that saying mom and dad makes her feel left out, and so we should all just say parents instead. It's almost as if when people's feelings get hurt, the world has to pay for it. But here's the thing, according to Phil, he's fine with saying mom and mom, but if his experience and that of other people is growing up with a conventional mom and dad, why is it on the don't say list? Dr. Phil sees this as yet another example of how woke culture doesn't just express opinions but imposes them, forcing their experiences and emotions onto everyone around them. They create rules on what you should say and how you should interact. And if you go against that law, you're cancelled. And speaking of being canceled, the cancel culture is just another issue for Phil, but we'll talk about that in a moment. What Phil just can't understand is how aggressively woke people react when someone says something they find offensive.
Somebody that says something on Twitter or says something in an interview that is offensive to some group, and all of a sudden you start reading the messages they get. It's like, I hope you get ass cancer and die, you son of a bitch. I'll cut your throat. I'll come to your house and kill your children. Are you kidding me?
It seems like the level of anger and hate against people who don't agree with woke ideas is almost like they've been victims of a hate crime, and Phil just can't wrap his head around that. But back to the cancel culture. Phil, being the solution-oriented person his brand has been built upon, he offers in an alternative solution to cancel culture.
It should be counsel culture, not cancel culture. Let's sit down and talk about it. Let me educate you. Maybe you don't understand. Maybe when you do, you won't agree, but let's talk about this.
Counsel culture versus cancel culture. Phil's got a strong opinion on this one. He thinks wiping someone out just because they don't see eye to eye with you is taking things way too far. Instead, he's all about having a real conversation where you actually talk things out and maybe even learn something from each other. It is no secret that Phil has been all about communication when it comes to opposing ideas. As a matter of fact, he even believes it is the most progressive way to go about the disagreements between the left and the right, because this is what it would lead to.
If you get the left and the right and talk about what we agree on, everybody would agree. We want America to be the #1 country in the world. We want to be the leading superpower, the leading educational power, leading in technology, everything, right? Everybody would agree to that.
This is interesting because according to Phil, we need to realize that in the end, whether you're on the left or right, there are common interests we all share. Phil even says it's perfectly okay to disagree, but what's absolutely ridiculous is that there's often no chance to hear the other side out and find some middle ground. Most Americans might point fingers at the government for restricting their freedom or rights. And that's exactly what Phil's next statement really drives home.
Have the First Amendment protecting free speech, and we're muzzling each other. It's not the government coming in and taking it away, right? It's now we're muzzling each other.
Phil believes that simply disagreeing with woke beliefs can get you labeled as a hater, a misogynist, and could even cost you your job and social media presence. To him, this is the very definition of disregarding free speech and stripping away others' rights while claiming to fight for your own. According to Phil, this is not only hypocritical but also packed with unfair double standards, and now Phil has a message for all Americans.
I'm trying to get people to examine themselves and get back to the core values that they really hold near and dear, and not give too much attention to the loudest voice.
The loudest voices Phil is talking about here are the woke crowd. He believes they're a minority group themselves, and they get loud and disrespectful just to grab attention. But why shouldn't people pay attention to them? Well, according to Phil, the answer is simple.
This voice oftentimes is the shrill, fringe voices that are trying to rewrite history, biology, science, economies, all of these sort of things that they have no basis for what they're peddling. It's just that's how they want it to be. Well, that's not how it is.
Just because you want something to be a certain way doesn't mean it magically becomes that way, especially when what you're trying to change goes against the majority's experience and preference. Phil is urging everyone to return to common sense and logic. He insists he's not trying to take a political side, he's just focused on what's real. And it seems like the reality of things, especially when it comes to gender, has not only become complicated but also controlling. But don't just take my word for it. Listen to what this 5th grade teacher on Phil's show had to say.
People who hate the truth are because they see the truth as hateful. If you want to identify in any way you can, you're free to do so. But that does not mean that the rest of us have to join that illusion. You disagree, I disagree with you, and so you call it hate.
In a nutshell, this highlights one of the biggest issues with woke culture throughout history. People have always disagreed, but what's different now is that woke folks don't just disagree, they demand that everyone else falls in line with their views, according to Phil, to justify beliefs that aren't backed by science or facts. They come up with new words and practices. One of these practices is the use of trigger warnings on university campuses.
A couple of universities are using trigger warnings for Romeo and Juliet, where they say, trigger warning, suicide content. Well, spoiler alert.
Phil believes this is dangerous because it's where the coddling of feelings and emotions in the younger generation begins. He's especially appalled that these campuses are using trigger warnings for almost everything, even school plays. But what Phil says next is where things really get interesting.
Search trigger warnings, and you will find that the vast majority, overwhelming body of literature says trigger warnings not only don't work,
make you weaker.
They actually make you anxious. They actually create the problem that they were designed to avoid.
So why are these campuses still pushing trigger warnings, even when research shows they don't work? Phil's got a bold answer to that.
If I can look that up and find it, so can every university that's employing them. So why are they doing it anyway? Because they're virtue signaling. They're wanting to seem like I am super woke here. I'm really sensitive. I'm protecting all of the students and creating a safe place for them to get an education.
But that's not what real education is about. Phil argues trigger warnings actually end up creating more anxiety, and they send the message that students' comfort should always come first. The problem is when these students graduate and face the real world, they'll find out that life isn't always comfortable. That's why Phil is so concerned about this practice. Phil also thinks that aside from virtue signaling, woke folks seem more interested in controlling the narrative than having real conversations. Instead of encouraging open discussions, woke culture often shuts them down, pushing everyone to conform instead of thinking for themselves. And that's what really bothers Phil. It puts ideology over education and leaves no room for different perspectives. But aside from virtue signaling, Phil also believes this about woke people.
And so many of these people that jump on the bandwagon They don't even know what they're talking about. They just see somebody jumping on somebody's ass and go, hey, this is great. This will be fun.
Pile on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they don't even know what they're talking about.
So what do you think about all these? Is it true that woke people simply jump on a bandwagon just for a sense of belonging? Or is there some truth to how they feel? Let us know in the comments and subscribe.